but we're an internet service provider, and I've really spent the last sort of 3.5 years um, putting fiber under the ground of zones 1 and 2 of London. We've deployed about 600 kilometers of fiber. So when it comes to digitally enabling London and equipping it for the future, we feel like we've done our bit. But we're going to look at it not from we're not looking at it from an infrastructure level, sort of city level today. We're going to look at it more from a building perspective. And as Matt has already said, it's build it once, build it right, equipping London with future-ready digital infrastructure. So today I'm joined by two valuable partners of Vorboss. I've got Paul Browell from IT Vet. I'm probably not pronouncing your surname right there, Paul. And I've got Gary G from Hawley, formerly of Lendlease. So guys, if you wouldn't mind maybe introducing yourselves, and if you could perhaps touch on a couple of developments that you've proudly worked on in the past, that'd be great to set the scene.
Yep. So I'm Paul. I'm the commercial director from IT Vet. We're a design, build, and managed service provider for connected buildings. A couple of properties we've worked on is 1 Heading Street for the Crown, 10 Spring Gardens, which is in development, plus some others that are multiple buildings.
Yeah, so I'm Gary G. I'm senior associate as part of our digital strategy consulting team. I've worked on a lot of master plan projects around London, so Elephant Park in a previous life, and Stratford Cross as part of a previous life. My background is shopping centres. Some of the projects we're working on now in Hawley is a lot of commercial dotted around London. So 24 Endell Street is one we completed recently, and a host of many others.
Yeah, busy men indeed. God, I feel like that's really loud. Right, so guys, first question: how do you ensure that the digital infrastructure that you're both rolling out today is going to remain sort of adaptable and suitable for any future advances we might see in technology?
I'll go for it. We've got one mic.
Yeah.
I think it's always important to understand the operational and then the what you're trying to gain out of the building from a technology piece. So yes, you can put technology in that is future-proofed, but you have to also understand that putting something in now that you're trying to plan for 5 years in advance, 10 years in advance, but switching an infrastructure changes so quickly. So something that might be suitable now for 10 years will cost a lot of money, whereas you might find that putting something in that will tick the box now and then upgrade it in 5 years' time actually comes out at a more cost-benefit approach. So it's very difficult. Technology moves so quickly. I mean, everything here that's been showcased is coming out new and things like that. So from an infrastructure point, it's very, very difficult to plan for the future. All I would always ever say is make sure that you are connecting your building as much as possible. So making sure there's LAN connections throughout the building and you're no more than a 90-meter cable run from a point of presence, or you're at least flooding your building with landlord Wi-Fi. So all your IoT technology can hook into a Wi-Fi that you control and not relying on someone else.
I mean, I think you probably need to have a clear strategy around what you want for your tenants and your operations, and just making sure that through your the design process, that you're actually digitally enabling all the base build systems through the design and build of that.
Are there any particular examples that either of you would call out as exceptional, or where you think you've done a good job in terms of future proofing that particular development?
I would say so 1 Heading Street, although from a development perspective is about 4 or 5 years old now, it's the Crown sort of co-managed property in Regent Street that there has a central network that has Wi-Fi flooded for every floor, and even now they're adding new smart technologies pretty much every sort of 6 months because of the capabilities of the network that is in there. Although that network itself will probably need upgrading in the next year, because 5 to 7 years is the realistic life cycle of switching and Wi-Fi. The concept and the infrastructure design of that property allows for more technology to be added at whatever rate of knots the landowner or the tenants demand.
And then I guess, Gary, you've worked on a massive range of developments over your time at Lendlease and then more recently Hawley. And obviously those developments have got a huge range of tenants that call them home. So In your view, like how can today's smart buildings be designed to accommodate for the needs of very, very different tenant profiles?
Um, oh,
Difficult one, yeah.
Difficult one, yeah. I think again, I need to speak back to that strategy. Having a clear strategy that responds to the leasing side of things, the asset management, what your investors are looking for, and also the tenants and building operations. So ensuring that you've got a view of all those strategies and ensure that any technology strategy you implement for a building is implemented is sort of wrapped up into that and delivered. I think it's important to. There's a lot of technology out there, so I think it's important to prioritize what's important for those that in response to those strategies, because you are more likely to get the technology in as part of those, as opposed to, I guess, like a spread and going, we think we need this, but you don't have a clear strategy or use case for that. Technology that's been poorly implemented, I found, is where you haven't had a lot of thought into it, or there's no clear strategy, or the user experience is clunky. So I think focusing on the important things and delivering the things that drive the most value is important.
And what about you, Paul? Anything to add on that front? The question. So clearly you're working on projects that have really, really diverse tenants and tenant requirements are really, really different. So how do you cope with that?
Most tenants' connectivity is key. So, leaning on yourself in terms of bringing in that core connectivity to allow, the thing with multi-tenanted or multi-things, you don't know, even if a landlord has a strategy in terms of the type of client they want to attract, that can still change. I think it's leaning on that strategy of, is this a managed building? Are we providing services for the tenant, or is it a full Cat A fit out? Is it mixed use of resi, commercial and retail? So I think you need to fully understand that at the start, so you can then design the network to make sure that it's suitable.
And then it all changes, and the tenants you think
changes
move
at
in.
stage 4, and you've designed one way, and then you have to redesign it, and then argue with architects around cab space. Yeah.
Fun times. So, in terms of the technology that you're both rolling out at the moment, is there any single piece of technology that you're putting in these buildings that's really sort of contributing towards tenant satisfaction and happy tenants?
Should we say? We don't provide the actual technology. So from a smart perspective, we're not rolling out any sensors or apps or things like that, but we do roll out Wi-Fi technology. And I think where you're dealing with connected buildings, particularly if you're providing a managed service, in terms of as a building you're giving out Wi-Fi and internet as part of the lease, the Wi-Fi technology that we're putting in is critical, because people don't use plugged networks anymore from your devices. Most laptops don't even have a LAN connection; it's all Wi-Fi. So from our side, that technology is exciting, but at the same point, we're seeing it as being an issue, because there are so many limited Wi-Fi channels you can broadcast on, and that is now causing issues with particularly multi-tenanted spaces where every tenant can put their own Wi-Fi in and use their own channels. We're finding that space get congested. So putting in good Wi-Fi that you manage centrally is quite critical to delivering that service.
No, for sure. Anything to add on that front, Gary?
I think user experience is important, so making sure that it's not clunky. So, for example, I think in the Turing building, what I did work with Lendis is that we decided very early on a very centralized access control strategy. So that was actually using HID outside there. So we wrapped up all the touch points where we had a touch point of an access control reader. So that was the turnstiles and the lifts, the Coney lifts. There was the actual tenant access floors, and also the smart lockers, and making sure that when you went through the whole building, you used the experience of opening a door was the same. And that requires a high level of software integration. So that's a good example of that being delivered correctly, is to make sure that you don't want to be opening an app to do something else that should actually be that's in conflict with how you access the rest of the building.
And I guess on the flip side of that, have you got any examples of technology that you've rolled out historically that perhaps has fallen flat or hasn't been used or has become redundant, shortly after being implemented? Or do you just always nail it the first time?
I think certainly leaning on access control, my experience of what I've seen is different technologies get tried, like biometrics and facial recognition and things like that. But I think there's always a hesitation to do that, of that kind of keyless entry. And I think, I'm not saying that it's failed, but I think people still lean towards a physical card or having a phone to tap rather than having that completely personless entry. And what I'm seeing from a strategy point of buildings is where people like the idea of not having a concierge or not having front of house and things like that. Those technologies are great, but then you lose that personal touch of why are we doing this in buildings and things like that. And actually, we're seeing the strategy of having people at the front desk to welcome people, because that's what the landlord or the owner wants from their building. So I wouldn't say it's necessarily failing, but I think it's the strategy behind how buildings operate may make some of those technologies quite quirky and fun, but might not be mainstream in terms of future of buildings.
Yeah, lovely answer. Anything to add on that front, Gary, or you've got a faultless history?
I think it'd be a bit perverse if I said that we haven't. Every piece of technology we deliver is perfect. I think everybody in this industry has probably had a bad experience with technology at some point in life. I can probably speak to one particular project where there was an aspiration to deliver something smart, but it ended up being a little bit different from what we expected. I think the main drawback of that project was we were constrained by budgets, and therefore we didn't actually end up with a cohesive user experience, i.e. we had an app for this, an app for that, and an app for that. I mean, this was several years ago. So I'm glad we have actually progressed as an industry further forward with that, with the likes of building apps and tenant experience apps to wrap that all together. But back then it was very difficult without a lot of money thrown into developing something that would bring those various touch points together. And that was, I think that project involved a little bit of access, a little bit of desk booking and room booking. It was just very difficult to bring them together. So that's one that kind of, the idea was great in terms of, and the technology that in a way met most of the use cases, but where it fell flat was actually that experience of not having everything in one place and the users having to open 3 different things to do different things.
So if we shift gears from sort of looking retrospectively at what you guys have done historically, and look now, which is always dangerous, to the future and start to make some predictions about what that might look like. What emerging tech do you think is going to have the most significant impact on property development over the next 5 to 10 years?
I mean, you can use the buzzword AI. I mean, that is ultimately, again, sensors are sensors. How they collect data isn't realistically going to change in terms of the physicals. That's how we use that data. So, I mean, I'm not an AI building specialist, but I can already see, even from an operational perspective, how AI is helping us work as a business, and even other businesses are adapting it. I think that's going to be huge in terms of how buildings use that data. So manipulate and then use that to help operationally improve that building, and even ultimately lower costs from different things of changing the temperature automatically and stuff, which a lot of the sensors can do themselves, but having an integrator of AI would definitely help.
And what about you, Gary? What are your predictions for the next 5 to 10?
Probably in line with what's already been said. I think at the moment we have everything that we need now. The basis is good. I think the key thing is making sure that as the technology is implemented and you've got your building management and investors interested in the building, and making sure that they're actually leveraging and using what we have now, because that's going to determine what's going to happen in 5 to 10 years. Once you overlay AI into that's going to make that more efficient. But I think it's more, the next 5 years is going to be building management, investment management, grasping the data that you have and getting something useful out of that. I don't think we've quite conquered that mountain yet. And then seeing what happens in that 5 to 10 years. I think what will come out of what we do now and how we use it now, that's going to influence that 5 to 10 year mark.
So you're not committing yet. No, I like it. Paul, you touched on this earlier when you were talking about, Wi-Fi networks being saturated, but, clearly buildings are becoming more and more connected. And we were talking about this before, but what are some of the biggest challenges you face when now implementing digital infrastructure on some of these larger scale developments?
I think it's particularly Wi-Fi. As I said, everything nowadays needs IoT devices or Wi-Fi driven. Not much uses, less is using LAN in terms of how everything's connected up. The issue, as I said, we're seeing is certainly in congested areas like central London, the Wi-Fi signals themselves are becoming congested. There's only so many channels available. Wi-Fi 7 will help alleviate that by adding more additional broadcast channels. But where you get tight-knit buildings, all multi-tenanted, every tenant goes in and they'll put their own Wi-Fi in and they'll put their APs up to full power. It's just what you do natively. We're an IT installer. We do the same. If we're working for a tenant, we'll put Wi-Fi in and blast it. But what they don't see the impact is, yes, you might flood your floor, but you'll flood the 2 floors down or 1 or 2 floors down. Well, we've done Wi-Fi surveys in the Mayfair area. You go in one little small office, you can see 60, 70 SSIDs. And then you're trying to troubleshoot an intermittent Wi-Fi problem with some devices. From an MSP perspective, it's impossible to actually troubleshoot that. Clients want Wi-Fi. They want to work off Wi-Fi. They don't want to plug in anymore. They want to go from one desk to a phone booth to whatever and work. So they want that seamless transition. It's the same with building technology as well. If you've got various IoT products that all run off their own Wi-Fi hub, you run the risk of, you might build this smart building, but you might have all of your technologies running off different Wi-Fi hubs, different Wi-Fi ranges. What you need to do is make sure that you're putting one landlord CNS Wi-Fi system throughout the building that the landlord and the ultimate IT operator controls. So when you're looking to implement new sensor technology, you're going to the provider saying, I have an SSID for you. Here's the details. Here's the password. You can configure your sensors for that, rather than them having to put any infrastructure in at all. And that will help alleviate within the building. But you still need to work with your tenants as well. So not saying that you need to get to a point that you make it as part of the lease that they don't turn their APs up full power, but work with them and show them the implications. You're doing regular heat map surveys of Wi-Fi within the building will help operationally as well.
Yeah, no, it's a really interesting one. So it sounds like your suggestion is that landlords perhaps regain a bit of control when it comes to in-building connectivity.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Difficult challenge for those
much.
guys. Yeah, don't know where the appetite's there to do that or not. Gary, anything to add on that sort of connected building challenge?
I think, especially, the projects I've worked on is predominantly master plans, so they are 10 to 15 year type cycle projects. So I think one of the challenges I've had is actually having a master plan strategy around how we're going to capture those 10 or 15 buildings throughout that development period, right? So connectivity is one. So making sure that you've got a clear connectivity strategy, multiple providers, quality of connectivity speeds. I think ensuring that as part of that master plan, all the buildings on those plots, or even as part of a portfolio that you might be managing, are sort of responding to that top level strategy to make sure that the requirements for those buildings that you're building are clear. And that's where you can achieve a level of standardization. I think those are the ones there. I mean, that's the challenge. I think where it's gone right is where you've thought about it early. You've actually made all the plot teams aware that that's happening. And then effectively making sure that all of them are holding budgets in their projects. I mean, we know that through design and build, if something's not in the cost line at stage 2 or stage 3, then it typically doesn't get delivered, or it comes as a bit of a shock when you go into stage 4 and 5, and that's far too late.
Yeah, for sure. No, I guess it's challenging enough at a single building level, but when you've got a whole campus to roll out over, 5 to 7 years, it becomes even more of a challenge.
I was going to say as well, you need to consider the operational impacts as well. You can build these buildings intelligent from day one, but you need to run them going forward. So from an IT and cyber perspective, is networks once they're in, they still cost money. It's not a case of you build it once and it's going to look after itself. It needs looking after, be that in licensing, if you're using things like Meraki or Cisco, the ongoing licensing costs. But you also need to consider the cyber implications. And that's not just your network being up to date, but it's your smart technology being up to date. All of these apps, they run off firmware. They need updating. They need to be maintained. So making sure you've got a cyber policy behind your network is very, very key. And that is either building specific or portfolio specific, depending on what type of landowner you're working with. But I think it's very, very key that you have that strategy in place so that you know how you're going to maintain these buildings going forward, and having that life cycle plan for this technology, because it won't last forever. It's not a 25-year cycle, which is something that we see a lot of. You're talking about sort of 5 to 8 years on a lot of switching and Wi-Fi technology. But yeah, that operational piece is very, very key as well.
Lovely. So we're running out of time. I feel like you've both given a lot of advice and imparted a lot of wisdom on the crowd that's here today. But to wrap up, before we perhaps pass to any questions from the crowd, what would be the most critical piece of advice you would offer to property developers or landlords or anyone in our audience looking to install future-ready digital infrastructure?
Go first. Yeah, go first. I think it probably comes back to the whole strategy piece. So having a clear vision at the outset of that captures everything that's going to happen in that building, from leasing to asset management to building operations to even tenant mix. I think then the next step is to actually ensure that you get the digital enablement that responds to that strategy, to make sure that you can get the data out of the buildings. Quite often that doesn't happen. And then the third step is then look at the actual technology that you can layer on top of all of that, and how that technology interacts with the building directly. I think that's important.
And how about you, Paul? Last piece of advice for the day.
I think it's that same, but making sure you're bringing that operational plan into that strategy. So don't see operation and development as two separate things. When it comes to technology, look at it as a whole piece of, I'm going to implement it and I need to run it for X number of years. But also looking at that, yes, you can have a spec for a building and someone might say you need the best switching, the best Wi-Fi that's out there right now to future-proof. But as I said, look at that cost benefit, because I think we spoke earlier in the week, technology certainly from switching and Wi-Fi is deflammatory in terms of pricing comes down quite quickly. So 10 gig switches right now are very, very expensive, or high cost, whereas you put 1 gig in now, by the time you come to wanting to swap that out and you need the 10 gig will be much more cost effective. So there is that. I'm not saying it works every time, but have it as a consideration as well as part of the design.
Lovely. How are we looking for time? 3 minutes. Are there any questions at all from the Nigel?
Thank you. Nigel Atkinson from Connected Real Estate. Good morning, Gary. Just from the position of build it once, build it right, when would be the right time to put Wi-Fi 7 into a building? What are you recommending to your clients? Because to your point on switching, it's still quite expensive at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, Wi-Fi 7 is still very, very new, and there's not every manufacturer's rolled it out. So Wi-Fi 6 would be a standard. I think you're looking at it. So Wi-Fi is very much an environmental issue. So it's not so much one or the other. You have to go for one or the other. It's scan, make sure you do your heat mapping, scan and understand, but also understand what the future development around the area is going to be. So if you're if you're doing a science park in the middle of nowhere, chances are you're not going to suffer from any Wi-Fi issues. But if you're building in a very congested area with lots of developments going up, that could be a consideration. And also, it's very difficult to plan because Wi-Fi might be fine now, but in 3 or 4 years' time, once that's developed, you might then start getting issues, and there's no real policing over it. So that's very difficult. But you have to. I would always just say, make sure you're doing those surveys, make sure you're doing that heat mapping and understanding what Wi-Fi noise is out there, and do it throughout the development, because we can do desktop surveys, we can do it live in build and at PC, but make sure you've got those progressives so you can see the changes as the building goes as well, because the physical building will impact the Wi-Fi at the same time. So you have to do that stage. Don't just rely on a floor plan with someone scattering some access points and going, that will do. Make sure you've got the survey to back it up.
Brilliant. I think that's us on time. All three of us made our fireside chat debut today. So thanks, guys, for joining me. I thought that was really, really valuable. And thanks to everyone for attending. Cheers.